Hello, everybody. How's everybody doing? I hope you're doing all very well. Better than me. Okay. Well, we have an exciting day today in physics. We're going to be dealing with Mr. Jim Al-Khalili again. He talked about him the other day, and I don't know if you're aware, but they blocked my video. I had to redo some of the little clips there that I included. Big problem, big headache, but it's done with. Anyways, I have a lot of fan mail before I get to Mr. Khalili. And, I just get too much fan mail, so I can't answer all the questions. I want you to know that. I select the ones that I think are worth discussing or something that I want to say about them. And I want people to know, you can cuss my mother if you want. It doesn't matter to me. If you've got an interesting topic and I consider it interesting, I'll bring it up anyways. It doesn't matter. So, I've got very thick skin after 20 years of fighting the establishment. Believe me, you get thick skin. I got crocodile skin. Okay, so let's go with the first comment here. If I can get this thing up here. Very simple comment. A fellow who watched one of my vids where I put a little cartoon and two animals were talking, two triceratops. He says, "Holy shit, I didn't know animals could talk." And the answer to that, I've got two answers to that. The first one is, yeah, and every human is proof of that because we belong to the animal world. Now, some people believe that, they are rocks and minerals. Others might think they're veggies, plants belong to the plant world. I don't know. As far as I'm concerned, humans belong to the animal world, okay? Especially within that big category, we belong to the mammals. And within that category, to the primates and so on. Anyways, that's one issue. The other issue is, you might say, well, Bill, I don't understand when two beavers talk. How do you know they're talking? Or two elephants or whatever. Well, we don't understand when two Chinese talk. And because of that, are you going to say that they don't have communication, that they don't talk, just because we don't understand them? So yeah, we are animals, and I think all animals pretty much talk in some way or communicate in some way. The fact that we don't understand them, well, I don't understand Chinese, so if two Chinese people are talking, well, I wouldn't understand them. Okay, so keep those issues in mind. Next question, is Max Weber considered a Disneyland economist? Well, I read Max Weber when I was in college, and I liked his theory. Essentially, it says that Protestantism helped capitalism more than Catholicism. Okay, he's saying that he essentially tries to justify why the countries of Northern Europe advanced a little more than the ones in the South, and he says that that was the Protestant spirit, specifically the Calvinist spirit. And in general, that says that, God already selected those who will be saved. He's already chosen the chosen ones. and and the way you recognize them here on earth is you look around. Okay, you look around, see who prospers. That guy's been chosen by God. And see who's under the bridge, begging for money. Well, that's a bum that's not been chosen by God. Essentially, I guess he had this idea, not quite, but that it's the rich that go to heaven. He didn't want to say it like that. He really said it's the progressive type, the people who work, who bust their buns, and produce something. Well, he said those are the people who have God in them. Okay. And I consider Weber, Disneyland economist as much as I considered Marx. I used to be a Marxist, so I considered Marx also a Disneyland economist. Keynes, Friedman, they're all Disneyland economists for me because I distinguish Disneyland, and I do a little bit of Disneyland economics as well. I consider Disneyland economics anything related to human economics, solely human economics, specifically, stock market, interest rates, money supply, all that's Disneyland. Because all that's fake. That's just to keep the economy rolling. I distinguish that from the natural economy. What is the natural economy? Food. That is Mother Nature's economy. She doesn't care about money. She doesn't care about interest rates. That's stuff that belongs specifically to humans. But the entire animal world, and yes, we are part of the animal world, right? The entire animal world only cares about one thing, and that is food. And we are part of that. The only thing that keeps us alive one more day is food. So you may have all the money in the world and be stuck, in an island without any food. Well, that money's not going to help you at all. So Disneyland economics is anything outside of the natural economy, and that's the only one any animal, wild animal, especially out there, cares about: food. And we're going to care about food when money is no more, when trade is no more. That's the way I see all these economists. Okay. So yeah, and I include Marx because Marx did write Das Kapital, Capital. And I read it, thick book like that. Don't ever read it. Too much detail. 19th century stuff related in great measure to manufacturing. And today we have no manufacturing. So a lot of what Marx analyzed is probably not pertinent today anymore, because even though the mechanism he explained I think is quite reasonable, I'm not sure it applies today. A lot of that does not apply today. He could not foresee what would come in 100 years. Okay, moving on here. Next comment. Who are you working for? Well, I'm going to tell you a little secret, okay? I work for the CIA, okay? Part-time, only part-time, okay? And yeah, I work for the disinformation department of the CIA in Washington. And so all I can say is whatever you take out of this site, this channel, don't believe it. It's all disinformation, okay? But please help me distribute it, okay? Because that's part of my job, to make sure more people believe the nonsense I talk about, okay? And also it gives me my paycheck, okay? So that's who I work for. Okay, here's another comment. It says, in England, get this here. In England, 1980, rate of autism 1 in 12,000. Today, 2020, autism is 1 in 29, okay? I don't know if those numbers are correct, but yeah, I believe that autism has been on the rise. I also said homosexuality. By homosexuality, I mean all the what is it? All the sexes. Okay, in other words, bisexual, trisexual, homosexual, asexual, all the sexuals you can think about. Okay. I include all of those in there, and I'm saying that's on the rise as well, okay? And this fellow says, it is depopulation using vaccines and ultrasound. Okay, another fellow mentioned something similar. Last week we had, I think, 3 guys saying that it's vaccines. One guy, at least, who said that it's got to do something with the waves out there. And my answer to that is no and no. Okay, and let me tell you why. The first reason is that, John Calhoun's experiments, which I talked about a couple of weeks ago, show that mice and rats, whichever group he did a total of like 30 experiments throughout his life. Each one lasted like a year or so, and his conclusion was that, all these animals, they were just crowded and just reproducing in a fixed space. So the only variables there, as far as I'm concerned, one is density, which is what he was investigating. He was a psychologist, so he was investigating the influence of density on a given population that is expanding. Okay, that was what he was looking at, and that could have that could be a factor, no doubt, in my mind as well. But I think the main factor was genetics, the fact that you're reproducing from the same founders, founders effect. And I think that's got a deleterious effect after several generations. And, if you look at something that's probably happening to humans as well. We were 1 billion people sometime at the beginning of the 1800s, maybe 1810, 1820s. Maybe by sometime between a quarter or half of the 20th century, we reached 2 billion. And by the time I was born, we were just slightly under 3 billion people here on Earth. I was born in 1952. And today we're almost 8 billion. So we more than doubled since I was born. And and we all came from the stock that we've got out there. So, that's got to have some kind of effect on our genetics. Okay. And I think that's the main issue. Genetics, I think, is the primary variable that we have to look at. But, in Calhoun's experiments, there were no vaccines and there were no electromagnetic waves. I mean, more than usual. Ultrasound, as this guy says, there wasn't any of that. And still he got autism. So, he created autism in the lab together with homosexuality. He created both. So you should look at his experiments with us, especially number 25. Okay, it's known as Utopian Universe, Mouse Utopian Universe, and look at number 25. He also wrote a paper, a couple papers that you should read. It tells you what his conclusions are. I don't agree with all of his conclusions. Again, he was a psychologist. He was looking at certain things. I was looking at something else when he did that experiment, but it's a very important set of experiments. Okay, next issue. Someone brings up the Neanderthals, subject close to my heart. Okay, Neanderthals lived to a fifth of plants. I think his English, I think, isn't very good, but I think what he meant here is that a fifth of their food was veggies. Okay, so that's essentially what he's saying here. Collagen in the bones of prehistoric people, plant-based foods were also on their menu. Studies of the teeth of Neanderthals, Amanda Henry, he mentions, found remains of plant food in the teeth of various Neanderthals, which once lived in what is now Iraq and Belgium. In the tartar between the teeth, researchers found fossil remains of dates, legumes, seeds of various grasses, water lily roots, etc. Okay. I read Amanda's paper, Amanda Henry's paper a few years back, and I don't agree with her conclusions. And let me tell you why. First, let me show you her paper. Okay, here it is, side by side. Well, we can put it over here, I guess. How's that? And this is what she says, the relevant part of her group's paper, okay? Phytoliths and the starch grains recovered from dental calculus of Neanderthal skeletons. That's what they studied, right? Neanderthals made use of diverse plant foods available in their local environment and transformed them into more easily digestible foodstuffs, in part through cooking them. Okay, cooking. One problem I have with that. Microfossils recovered from calculus are therefore a direct record of the plants an individual put in his mouth, which may include some non-dietary plants. Important point, but should overwhelmingly consist of plant foods. Okay, so their group essentially said, look, the Neanderthals ate plants. Okay, and even her paper mentions that they were still primarily meat eaters. Okay, that's an important point to make, and I think no one in paleontology will dispute that. Okay, here's my criticism of that summary. Okay, let's go step by step here. Okay, first we have these a couple of the samples that her Henry's group analyzed were the Shanidar hominids, and I don't think they were Neanderthals. Okay, today there's somewhat of the debate. The majority is against people like me, but there's a very important group, especially from Israel, who studied the Shanidar samples, and they say those guys weren't Neanderthals. And yeah, I'm just going to show you real quick here. You can see a difference between the Shanidar skulls and those from La Chapelle, France, one of the Neanderthals, typical Neanderthals of the West. And I think the heads of the Shanidar ones are more rounded. They don't have such pronounced eyebrows. Their heads are not as elongated. Okay. Now you might say, well, Bill, what do you know about morphology and physiology and all that stuff? And the answer is nothing. All I can tell you is what my eyes see on the one hand. The other thing is that it's not me who's criticizing this, it's people who inspected these skeletons, these skulls, and they are a lot more familiar than me about bones and so on. And they've concluded and they challenge the fact that those in Shanidar, Iraq, are the same type of Neanderthals or the same type of creatures as we find in Western regions such as Spain, France, Belgium, and Germany, as well as England. But I don't think they have any samples, any skulls from England. They just have other types of evidence. Okay? So I don't think these guys were Neanderthals. And here I'll show you something else. Here's a map, typical map that you'll see. And I put those blue lines there. I think those in the West were Neanderthals. Those from Italy all the way to what used to be Yugoslavia and farther east. I'm not sure if those were Neanderthals as well, but they could be. I still haven't made up my mind, especially the Krapina and Vindija. But the ones in the East, the ones in Russia, or the ones in Israel and Iraq, I don't think those were Neanderthals. That's my personal conclusion. So every time they get some information from these guys, I have doubts that they were Neanderthals. Here's another Neanderthal site map. It's a little more extended. You can see it goes all the way into Russia. And I have grave doubts that the Neanderthals went that far. I think Neanderthals were a creature primarily of the West, and so I don't trust these maps. At least, I'm not in agreement with them. That's my personal take, okay? And what else do I want to show on that? Okay, getting back to this, the summary here. Let me put that back up here. Okay, the other issue I have with food stuff, whether they ate veggies, is that, the fact that you find some stuff in their teeth, well, I don't know, maybe they were smoking. I mean, I can make an argument they were smoking weeds, getting high or whatever. Maybe they were using them as medicinal herbs. Maybe they used it to start a fire. Maybe that's why they're charcoaled, okay? And maybe they're sleeping in beds of these grains because they just pulled a lot of these weeds, as far as they were concerned, made some kind of mattress and just slept on that so they wouldn't sleep on the rocks. I mean, we can come up with different theories for why they found some of these things in their mouths. Maybe these guys were breathing it when they were sleeping. Who knows? The main point, I think, is that these guys were primarily hunters. I don't think they spent their time gathering grains. I cannot imagine, the Neanderthals going out there and say, well, today I'm not going to hunt mammoth with a clan. This is what they thrived on. They loved the hunt, the excitement, besides it provided them with food. And I can't imagine all these clansmen, for lack of a better word, they were part of the same clans, right? And going out there and say, oh, today we are going to pick weeds. I mean, you gotta collect tons of weeds just to make a little bit of bread or something similar to bread, or to grind them, or to eat it, to cook it and eat it. Then there's no bowls. How did they cook them? I mean, they just put the little weed in the fire, and when it got burned a little bit, just put it in his mouth. Is that how they ate them? I cannot imagine a hunter such as this gorilla was in the Arctic doing that, not 50,000 years ago, a basal hunter-gatherer. I think these guys were just out there and killing animals, especially big animals. And one of the things you got to look at is also the dates. It's not the same thing as when you look at a Neanderthal from 80,000 years ago, which you could say was the Neanderthal heyday. Maybe it's the classical Neanderthal, the guy who went there with 8 or 10 of his buddies, family members. They were part of the same clan, uncles and cousins and whatever. They went out there with their spears and they brought down maybe a big animal like a mammoth or maybe a deer or something like that. And they would bring that animal in, cook it on the fire, on the campfire. That's what I imagine that as. And they were just eating a leg or whatever. That's the way I see these Neanderthals. But imagine now towards the end of the Neanderthal reign, closer to 40,000 years ago, 40,000 years later. No longer do you have that classical Neanderthal. Now what do you have? Well, you have maybe a handful of Neanderthals. Maybe there's only 3 or 4 in a clan. The rest are old people, maybe, and they have to take care of those, like, Social Security, retirement. And so they're taking care of these old folks who are either hurt because they've been in some kind of action against an animal. They got hurt there, or maybe they're just old or whatever. They got arthritis. And so now the young generation has to maintain those old folks, women and men, as well as themselves and their babies. And so they go out there and there's only maybe 3 or 4 of them. Well, maybe they don't have now the quorum to bring down a mammoth anymore. So I think the culture could have changed as well towards the end. In fact, you can almost guarantee that it changed towards the end. And maybe they were hunting rabbits. Maybe they could hunt a rabbit and they honed their skills on smaller animals and they forgot about the big ones because they did not have the clan there, the big numbers to bring down a gigantic animal such as a mammoth. It was too dangerous. So I think the culture changed towards the end, just like it's changed, within humans. In 2,000 years, how much has our culture changed? Well, you can imagine 40,000 years, 80,000 years ago versus 40,000 years ago. Their culture must have changed as well, even though they were all basal hunter-gatherers. And then that's related to some degree to the extinction that the causes of extinction that I propose, which is 2 of them. One is the loss of genetic diversity and the overturning of the population pyramid. And here's a note on the genetic diversity. If I can get this thing up here. Okay, and this is one paper that you'll see other papers as well. Neanderthals had even less genetic variation than present-day humans. Genetic diversity among Neanderthals was about 1/4 as much as seen among modern Africans and 1/3 that of modern Europeans or Asians. And you'll find several papers on this issue. So I think they lost genetic diversity. In fact, I read a paper once where they compared with few samples. Remember, we only have anywhere between 300 and 500 individuals. And that's about 1 per every 1,000 years that the Neanderthals were around. So we have very few samples. With this, we have to build this puzzle. And if what they did is they went through several samples and they showed that throughout time, the Neanderthals lost genetic diversity. Like they had more genetic diversity 80,000 years ago than they did 40,000 years ago. And you would expect that if you consider inbreeding, right? The other thing, one paper that showed out that I read out there is this one, which is also related to that. So for you to keep in mind, and that's that the population pyramid overturned after thousands of years. And it says adult longevity. Again, these guys did a sampling of all the bones out there, skulls, etc. And they looked at the ages that each one of these individuals had. And they constructed this chart and it said adult longevity increased with human evolution from a ratio of old to young adults of about 0.12 to 0.4 for Neanderthal fossils, with a particularly dramatic increase in Paleolithic societies to more than 2 older adults for each younger adult. So towards the end of their reign, you had a 2-for-1 deal. You had 2 old people for every 1 young individual in the clan. And I think that that explains a lot. It explains that, their population pyramid overturned and they lost their genetic diversity. The two mechanisms I propose for background extinction, such as that of the Neanderthals. Okay. Changing the subject now, let's go to physics. Okay, and this fellow says, so in physics, a tornado isn't a noun, but something more like a sentence. Well, a tornado is a concept, it's a dynamic concept. If you can point to it, it's an object. And if it's moving, you can't point to it because it doesn't stand still. In other words, you can only point to something that's standing still. We're not talking about watching, we're talking about seeing or looking. So we're talking about something that's standing still, the only object in the universe. Okay, so there's nothing to compare its motion against. If it's moving, it's already a dynamic concept. That's what a tornado is. So it's not a sentence. What it is it's a movie. Okay, a tornado is a moving. It's the flowing of air. Okay, so it's something in motion. And so no, tornado is not an object for the purposes of physics. And neither is, what do they call this? The twirling around they use in the electric universe. I forgot the word. Anyways, all these torsions that they talk about. I forgot the word now. But they're tornadoes. And any tornado is a dynamic concept, not a physical object. You can say air is, if you have it standing still and you can count each atom in there, this body of atoms that we call a gas. Well, if you take the gas as a whole and you can point to that in a static universe, you can say, hey, that's a thing. Okay, and you can use that thing to, blow down a house, for example. So you can use it in a theory. But under those conditions, you can consider any gas a physical object. Okay, you can use that as an object because you can point to it as a whole. Remember, it's got to be as a whole. You can't say, well, what is it made out of? No way. That's mereology. Okay, so yeah. Anyways, those are the. Okay, continuing here. One guy asks. I like this one. One guy asks, he says, what are the name of the experiments that conclusively proved that the Earth is moving through space? Okay, I love that. Okay, first of all, we don't prove in science. Okay, that's the first answer. Okay, we don't prove anything in science. Proof means that you're convinced of something. So whatever experiment you do, which we don't do in science, we don't do experiments. Why? Because the only purpose of experiments is to collect evidence. And the only purpose of evidence is to convince yourself of something, either to change your mind or to confirm your theory, your beliefs, or whatever. So that's why we don't use proof, evidence, experiments. None of that has anything to do with science. Whatever you learned in high school, in college, well, that's not the scientific method. That's the religious method. In science, we only explain. We explain objectively so that you understand. So that's the first thing. We got to get rid of the word proof, and we got to get rid of the word experiment. But here's proof. Here's an experiment that you can do to convince yourself, right? This is for yourself only, okay? You can go out tonight and do what this fellow is doing here, okay? And he's going to look at the sky and he sees the moon going by, okay? And you can see that, if you stand absolutely still, you'll find that somehow the moon is moving across the sky. If you stay long enough, you'll see that it changes location in the sky, right? And so what's the issue? Well, the issue is that if this thing called the moon is moving with respect to you, this thing called the moon is also moving with respect to the Earth, which means that the Earth is moving with respect to it. Now, I don't know if that sank in your brain, but let me put it in other terms so maybe you'll understand. God is all powerful, right? I mean, God I mean, he's got all the superpowers, right? He can do anything he wants. Well, he can do anything he wants, but he can't stand still if I don't want him to stand still. If I want to move God and I challenge him, I say, God, I'm going to move you no matter what. And he said, do it, Bill. I'm going to stand absolutely still and prove you wrong. Okay? So I move my little finger. Wing, 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 wing. And God said, oh, stop moving me. Stop moving me. Why? Because we have to define what motion is. And for that, we have to start with the word distance. Distance, separation between two objects. What is location? Location is a static concept, the set of distances. And motion is two or more locations of an object. So if God's distance is his location changes with respect to my finger, by moving my finger, I'm moving God, whether he likes it or not. He can stand absolutely still, but all I have to do is move my finger in this direction, and God already moved in the opposite direction. He's got a new location with respect to my finger. I hope you understood. That means that you can move God anytime you want. He might be as powerful as he wants, but I can move him anytime I want. I just have to move my little finger or my hand. So I move it fast, and God says, stop doing that, Bill. You're moving me all around, going dizzy. Oh, sorry, God. I was just trying to explain motion to people. So yeah, if you want to know if the Earth moves, very simple. If you see the moon moving across the sky or the sun moving, Apollo, with his chariot moving across the sky, that means that the Earth is moving with respect to Apollo. Very simple. The distance is changing with respect to that little thing we call the sun or the moon or whatever's up there in the sky. Okay, so it's very easy to move God. You just have to move your finger. Okay, motion involves two. Not only is the object that you're using as a target the one that's moving out there in the sky, but that means if that thing moves, you're changing your location with respect to it. And so is the Earth. The Earth is moving with respect to that thing. So yeah, if the Earth does move no matter what, you can't have the Earth stand still when the moon is moving with respect to it. Okay, so that's very simple, straightforward. Okay, another comment, perhaps along the same lines. Bell says, the ether is not a substance. Whoa, good, I agree. It's not a substance, not a thing. Okay, it's a concept. The Michelson experiment does not disprove anything. Again, we don't prove anything or disprove anything in science. Okay, the only comment I made the other day is that Michelson experiment convinced the mathematicians of the 19th century and the early 20th century. They started losing their faith in the ether, and they said, well, we don't believe in the ether. We're not going to use it anymore. And so little by little, they got rid of the ether. And actually what they did was change the name of the ether, and they called it space-time, the false vacuum. They created all these different names for it, but it's the same ether. They just changed the name. That's all they did. All phenomena is due to the ether. Well, I don't know how it can be due to the ether if the ether is not a substance. Okay, so we have a contradiction there. If ether is an object, a substance, a thing, then you can say that phenomena is due to this thing. But you cannot say all phenomena is due to an abstract concept. Okay, so you got to determine whether the ether is an object or a concept. Okay, that's once you're go into science, do a little bit of science, ABC science, kindergarten science. Well, you'll learn that you got to define your terms. You got to define what the ether is before you can use the term. And he says what you call strings is dielectricity. Well, for sure, no, because dielectricity is a process. Okay, and then it says torsion of the ether. So he says it's not a substance, but now he's going to torque this concept. It's like torquing love, He says the ether is not a substance, not a thing. It's an abstract concept, and he's going to torque it. Okay, the ether isn't particles. Okay, then if it's not particles, what is it? I mean, you got to define what the ether is before you can use the term. You can't tell me what it ain't. You got to tell me what it is. And this is where a lot of people run into trouble. They never tell you what the ether is. They just say, no, that's not the ether. Whatever you said is not the ether. Well, don't tell me. It's like saying, is God an object or a concept? You say, well, it's neither, or it's both, or whatever. No, no, you got to tell me what God is. Then we can talk sensibly. If you can't tell me what God is, and I don't care what God is, I want to know what God is to you. You got to tell me what your God is. And same with ether. If ether is your God, your icon, whatever, the one you pray to, well, you got to tell me what the ether is. And do not conflate modern science and the ether. Yeah, again, the ether has just changed names. They don't call it the ether anymore. They call it, the false vacuum, virtual particles coming in from the void. They use all these synonyms, and essentially is the what they're talking about is bunch of particles. So ether is bunch of particles until someone can define the ether otherwise, okay? So don't use that four-letter word called ether in my presence, because I'm sure I'm going to have trouble with that. Okay, where are we now? Here it is. Okay, here's my rundown of what this guy said. Okay, so let's go step by step. Ether, bunch of particles. That's it. Mereology. Ether is a concept, and in science we don't prove. String is an object. Dielectricity is a dynamic concept. So you can't say that string is dielectricity or dielectricity is a string, because one is a concept, the other is an object. And you got to understand what the difference is between an object and a concept. What is a dielectric? It's an insulator. So even the word dielectric does not represent an object. Dielectric is a category of materials. That's what it is. And there you have common dielectrics. You have glass, plastics, metal, oxides, ceramic, mica, dry air, etc. Okay, so no, there's no such thing as a dielectric, and dielectricity is a dynamic concept. It's a process, something that's happening. So neither one qualifies as an object. And again, torsion of a concept, torsion of the ether. He's saying that ether is not an object, but he's going to torque it. And if not particles, what is the ether? You got to tell me what the ether is. You got to define it. And when he says, and space doesn't exist. Well, yeah, because space is not an object. That's why it doesn't exist. Only objects may be said to exist in science, in physics. Okay. And then, yeah, I'm not confusing modern science with the ether. It's that modern science simply gave different names to the ether. They still have all these terms like space-time, false vacuum, dark energy. All those are modern day ethers. Okay, they're all ethers. What is ether? Bunch of particles. That's it. So if you don't like bunch of particles, you better define it, because that's what it is until someone comes up with a definition of the ether. Okay, and don't look it up in the dictionary. They don't know either. Okay. Okay. Another comment, more or less along the same lines, because it comes down to that same road. Probably make Ken's book look clear. What's he talking about? Well, he's talking about a fellow named Ken Wheeler. Okay, and good old Kenny, he wrote, I talked about him a while back. He wrote this book, Uncovering the Missing Secrets of Magnetism. Okay, I couldn't read it all. I read as far as I could get, and then I gave up. I mean, you don't understand squat about what Kenny wrote. Absolutely nothing. He's just garbage, nonsense. He doesn't know how to write. That's the first issue. But aside from that, he just doesn't make any sense whatsoever. So I don't recommend that you read his book, because at least, if anyone can read that book, well, I don't know, he's got superpowers. Okay, there's no way anybody can read that book. It doesn't make any sense whatsoever. So those people who claim that they understand what Kenny Wheeler's talking about, well, they can go with good old Kenny. Anyways, here's my comments on good old Kenny. Okay, let me put it over here. The first one is the ether. He uses these terms: ether, field, counter space. I love counter space. Counter space, you know what counter space is? He doesn't define it, so it doesn't matter, so I can put anything I want in there. Counter space is when you remove all the bottles of beer at the bar. What's left is counter space. That's my definition of counter space. Yeah? Dielectricity, again, a concept. He uses that as a physical object. Again, makes no sense whatsoever. And the issue is Kenny has no definitions whatsoever. And here, let me just show you one instance, one example. Okay, Let's see if I can get this. This is what Kenny says. He's got all these aliases: Theoria Apophasis, Spirit of Socrates, Plotinus, Veritas. He used a lot of these Latin and Greek names. It says all attraction and repulsion is governed by dielectricity. No, it can't be, because dielectricity is a process. It's not a thing. So you can't say that, love does this. No, you can say that a heart does this or whatever, but you can't say love does it, because love is a process. Magnetism, which is the dielectric field. No such thing as a field. So we look up and find out what a field is, because he uses this word field quite a bit. In fact, he followed me originally when I came on YouTube, and the reason he ran away is because I criticized his notion of a field, and the field is his religion. Without field, Kenny is dead. Okay, so he says, first of all, the all-important word field must be rigorously and scientifically defined, with ambiguity and misconceptions fully removed. Totally agree. Okay, let's see. A field is a conjugate, non-spatial attribute. That's what it is. He says it's an attribute. Okay? And so if it's an attribute, we look up the word attribute. Let's see what an attribute is. It's a thing. It's a physical standalone object. No, it says resulting from a specific cause. So they're talking about the relationship, the event that happened, and that's what an attribute is. It just says that something caused something else to happen. Okay, it says something attributed as belonging to a person, thing, group, etc., like a quality, a character, property, etc. So that's what a field is. It's a concept. And if it's a concept, you can't say the field did this or did that. And then he talks about rotating magnetic fields. How can you rotate a concept? I mean, And then he talks about the strength and orientation of the field. So no, all of what Kenny talks about is absolute nonsense, poppycock. There's nothing in that book salvageable, okay? And some people claim they understand it, yeah, because they just gawk. That's all it is. What I liked about his book is that he took 5 quotes at least that I found. I didn't read even to the middle of the book. I could not stand it any longer. I just dropped it. There was no way you could read that. It's an unreadable book. Aside from the fact that 90% of it is just him giving himself pats in the back. It's just nonsense. But what he did, he took quotes from my book and from my presentations on YouTube. And I'm just going to give you one example. There's several more, okay? And you see how he does it. This is just a snapshot of his book, okay? So this is directly out of his book. Haven't changed a thing. And here you can see it, okay? And that you can see he quotes Nikola Tesla, and he gives him credit. Russell gives him credit. Leo Susskind, Niels Bohr, Feynman. But when he quotes me, he doesn't give me credit. Okay, he says you can always recognize the relatives. They will either ask for your credentials or offer their credentials without you asking for or about them. That's a quote directly out of my either my book or one of my videos. I've got him one of those too. And what's interesting, he quotes Susskind, and he gets that from me also, because that's something that I pulled out from Susskind. He found it, he liked it, he put it in his book as well. So even though it's not my quote, he got that quote from my book. Okay, so yeah, all these things that good old Kenny does, and again, he uses whatever he wants, doesn't give you credit for it. I don't mind. I mean, it doesn't hurt me at all. But it just shows you what kind of individual he is. Okay, let's move on here. Another comment. And goes like this. It says, the interconnections are made by ropes, the rope hypothesis. If so, the universe is full of atoms and ropes. There is no void space, emptiness, nothing. There is always something. Assuming that the blue threads inside the red electron shell are filling totally the volume of what the electron shell constrains. In other words, he's saying that there is no such thing as empty space, because every little inch, every micro-inch, pico space is taken over by ropes? Well, again, it shows that has some problem understanding. Okay, what's the issue? The issue is, let's see if we can get it here. I'm going to put a picture, and here you can see it. You see ropes there, okay? And the question is, what contours those ropes? Why can I see the ropes? Well, because there's some black stuff that gives shape or provides contrast to each one of those ropes. Let's remove the black stuff just to make sure that that we don't have interference. There it is. Now we can't see anything. Why? Because you need contrast to see two things. So every little inch of space cannot be full of ropes, because there has to be contrast to each rope. Otherwise, you can't even talk about rope. So hopefully, every single bit of space is not occupied by a rope. Okay. And again, we're talking about here on Earth versus out there in space. Here's the atom that we propose. If I can get it in here. Give me a second here. Okay, that's the atom we propose. And what happens when we remove that white stuff that serves as a backdrop? Well, again, that's what we get. We get nothing. So yeah, hopefully, right? All these ropes are contoured by some backdrop. I don't care what you call it. We call it space, vacuum, nothing. You can call it X for all we care, but there better be an X back there. Otherwise, there are no ropes. Otherwise, there are no threads. Okay. So whether you talk about an atom and the threads inside the atom, each thread had better be contoured by something. Okay. There is no such thing as thread without a backdrop. And I'm not sure how to drive that thing in. And again, a lot of this has to do with this ridiculous notion called the ether, that people say that it fills everything. No. Ether is a bunch of particles. And each particle had better have a backdrop, had better be contoured. And you got to tell me what that something is that contours each particle. We call that space. So you can talk about particles if you want. You can talk about the ether filling space. But space had better be there to provide contrast. If not space, it's up to you to tell me what contours each particle of ether. Okay, that's why ether, bunch of particles. You don't like that term, or you don't like that definition, please define the word ether. Otherwise, you can't use it. Okay, one guy says, like this one, had this question, what, 1 million times now? Okay, so let's put it up there. He says, would you explain what your ropes are made of? Well, that's an easy question, right, to answer by now. And see if we can get this thing in here. Give me a second here. Here it is. Tell you what they're made out of, okay? Here's the answer to that question. It's the law of mereology, also known as the law of the rope. And I want to get credit for this, okay? So I want a Nobel Prize for this. I want a Nobel medal. Please send it by email or whatever. But here's the law, okay? All ropes in the universe, any rope you can imagine, is made of 2 threads. Now here you have some examples. You got 4 ropes. You can see all of them are made of 2 threads. So I've discovered this law of the universe, and I do want to have full credit for discovering this, okay? And so yeah, every rope in the universe is made of 2 threads. In fact, here I have my rope, okay? Famous rope. And what do you see there? You see a red thread. We'll call them thread. You can call them string. You can call them X and Y. I don't care. But every rope in the universe is made of 2 threads, twined threads. And there are ropes that are made of 3 threads, okay? That's true. And some are made of 4. But the typical rope is made of 2 threads, okay? So I want to have credit for that, okay? That's a law of the universe that I discovered, okay? So please send the Nobel medal by email to me, okay? Okay, here's another question. Okay, they discovered a Bloch wall, the center area of a magnet with no magnetic activity. How does your rope theory account for that? First of all, it's not a rope theory, it's a rope hypothesis, and you need to understand the difference between a theory and a hypothesis. Hypothesis, it's the objects, the definitions, and the initial scene. That's what a hypothesis is. Theory is an explanation. Okay? So hypothesis is the detective comes to the crime scene, sees a person dead on the floor, maybe with a knife stuck to his back, and so he describes the scene. He says, look, there was a fella on the floor, knife on his back, the knife was so-and-so, we found him in the kitchen, whatever. All that description, that's the hypothesis. That's the assumptions, because defense attorney and prosecutors don't always agree on the assumptions. The theory is, how did the guy die? They have different theories. They have different explanations. Okay, and so you got to know the difference between a theory and a hypothesis. Okay, the rope is a hypothesis, not a theory. God cannot be a theory. God can only be a hypothesis. That way, that's why you can't talk about God being a theory. God is not an explanation. What you do is say, look, let's assume that God exists. Okay, let's concede the assumption. Now you can say, I believe, or this is how I think the world came to be, and now you explain how God made the world. So the theory is how God made the world. God is only an assumption, a hypothesis, a proposal. Okay? So God can't be a theory. So you got to know the difference between a theory and a hypothesis. Okay. So getting down to the question that he asked here. Okay, here are a couple magnets. Okay, and the top one shows how the quantum visualizes this, how everybody on Earth visualizes this, except the rope model of magnetism. Okay, what you see is the quantum version of the magnet, and you see that it's divided into north and south. In other words, sideways. And in the center, you have these this region called the Bloch, okay, that he was talking about. That's the Bloch waves and Bloch wall. That means that's the interface between not north and south, but between up and down, like you see, or top and bottom, like I call it, what you see at the bottom. See, under the rope model, you can understand why those lines of force create this thin line where they meet in the center of the magnet. Why? Because it's not divided into north-south, it's divided into top and bottom. And what am I talking about? Let's look at this in dynamic mode so that we get our point across, okay? And here it is. This is how the magnet works. This is just one magnet, and you see the threads on the top, they're moving counterclockwise, the red ones, and the ones on the bottom, they're moving clockwise. And where do they meet? Well, they go right through the center of the magnet, right completely across the center of the magnet, out the other end, and then they come back out and sweep around the magnet. And what this does is this forces the iron filings to pile up in those in that pattern, in the ones that are dictated by the movement of the threads. Okay, so that's the mechanism within a magnet. Okay, this is an analogy that I'm going to put here, similar, but it's not quite, but it just gives you an idea. Here you have two army tanks back to back, or facing, I guess, a mirror image, and you can see the wheels, how they're moving. That's more or less what we're proposing happens at the interface between two magnets, otherwise known as the Bloch wall. Okay. Now, here's the issue. Okay, here's the issue. What we're going to do now, we're going to make our magnet a little thicker. Well, even if we make it thicker, you'll see the Bloch wall will still be in that green region in the center between the two portions of the magnet, the top and the bottom. Okay, it's the thicker you make it, the wider that Bloch wall will be. Okay, why? Because you have more threads. That's why. And what happens if we make our magnet even thicker? Okay, so here's an even thicker magnet. Okay? And again, hopefully the threads are going through the center. The ones on the top, in this case, if the south is on your left side and the north is on your right side, then the top threads are swinging counterclockwise, the bottom ones are swinging clockwise. When they meet somewhere in the center of the magnet, they completely face each other throughout that straight line and come out the other end, and they swing around the magnet again. So what happens now, and here's the trick. This is something you can do at home, okay? You want proof, you want evidence to convince yourself? Okay, here it is, okay? Pay attention. Okay, we have two magnets, and we put one magnet on top of the other. Okay, so we have a top and bottom, and we put that over another top and bottom. Well, we know that they will attract each other because the red one in the middle will attract the blue one in the middle. Okay? Still, if you put one magnet on top of the other, like you see there, the Bloch wall should be between the entire column. You treat the whole thing as a single magnet. What has happened is this turned into this. That's what happened. Okay? So the magnets on the top are now, in this case, whether it's red and blue on the top, now they're swinging counterclockwise, and red and blue on the bottom are swinging clockwise. They change their direction. Why? Because what's changing is the direction in which the domains of the magnets are swinging the threads around the magnet. The more organized all those domains are, the stronger the magnet. Okay, so the more aligned they are, the more they will swing. The more they will swing in the same direction, the more strength the magnet will have. Okay, and just one more step here again. What happens? We put three magnets. Top, bottom, top, bottom, top, bottom. Well, again, hopefully the Bloch wall will be between the entire stack. It's got to be exactly in the center. And what does that mean? Well, it means that what we did, we turned that into this. Okay, so the Bloch wall will be in that green region in the center. Why? Because they changed their direction of spin. The domains did. Okay, and that's exactly what happens to the iron filings also. See, the iron filings also become magnetized when they get put into a magnet. Why? Because the sweeping of the threads around the iron filing compels the threads of the iron filings to swing in the same direction. Now it's magnetized. Okay, and I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on that, but I think you get the point. That's the theory for magnetism. Okay, let's get to our gentleman today. A little late, but it's always, I got a lot of questions. Again, I can't answer all the questions. I try to answer as many as I can, or the ones that are pertinent. Okay, here we have our man today. His name is Jim Al-Khalili. He was born in Iraq, but he's a British citizen, and he studied in England. And he's supposedly a theoretical physicist, author, etc., etc. I covered that last week, last week, I guess. And what do I think of good old Jimmy? Well, I think he's a caricature of a scientist. Why? Because all he's done is learn by rote. He had to get his degree. In order to get his degree, he had to be a yes man, had to be a little choir boy, little altar boy. He's got to repeat what his teachers taught him. And otherwise he doesn't graduate. He doesn't get an advisor for his PhD. So if he got to the PhD level, it's because, he had an advisor who said, hey, you better fall in line. Then you'll get a job. You'll have a great career. If you buck the trend, if you're against the bishops at the Vatican, you don't get to be cardinal. You don't get to be pope. The only way you get up there is if you bow down to the powers that be. Okay? And so this guy's one guy that bowed down, and now he's got a great career being a popularizer of so-called science, mathematical physics, if we can call that science. And all his explanations are irrational. So all he does is just talk about, what the mathematical establishment believes. Okay, and so that's it. That's essentially who he is, and that's how he makes his money today. And so what happens with Al-Khalili? Well, he wrote a book summarizing essentially what the mathematicians believe today and what they're into. So if you always wanted to know what these guys are into, what does a mathematical physicist do? I mean, what kind of job description does a mathematical physicist have? I mean, you have these guys working in Cambridge, you have them working in Harvard and Stanford and all over the place in every university. What do these guys do? They do equations every day. I mean, they drink coffee. They go to the water cooler and just shoot the bull around. I mean, what do they do? And so he wrote a book, and it's The World According to Physics. Okay? So in that book, again, a popularization, Al-Khalili talks about what physics is all about, modern physics. And we have a problem with that because I mentioned this some time back. We had Max Born, and Max Born said, look, physics has changed quite a bit. He said this in the 60s, when he wrote his book, 62 or 68, he wrote a book, and he says that in there. He says, look, physics is not what it used to be. Okay, we went from the 19th century where the mathematical physicists were very naive and they thought it was the end of physics, and it turns out it was just the beginning of physics, or mathematical physics, because they invented, in the 20th century, they invented general relativity, quantum, and later on, much further on, string theory. And none of those branches, or cults, as I call them, belonged in the 19th century. They had no idea about those things. They just had these what is known as classical mechanics. And with quantum mechanics and general relativity, that all changed. But in what way did it change? Well, it changed as Max Born said, it has become more abstract, especially string theory. I mean, string theory is so abstract that even the great folks who earned Nobel Prizes in the 60s and 70s rail against it, because they're saying, hey, what's this got to do with physics, and what's it got to do with science if science is about proving through experiments, and you can't even run an experiment to prove anything about string theory. It's just some kind of variation of mathematics, but what does it have to do with the physical world? And one of the concerns there is they built all these accelerators, and the string theorists have no use for them. Essentially, they say they do, that they're going to do some experiments to find out this and that, but no, because the only difference between string theory and quantum mechanics, essentially the string theories theorists, they accept everything in quantum mechanics. They just say that each particle of quantum mechanics in the standard model, it's just a vibration of a string, a one-dimensional string that is vibrating in, I guess, in all directions to make a three-dimensional particle, you would think, right? So it's not just up and down, it's just wiggling in all directions. And so a particle is a movie, just like an orbital is a movie. A bunch of orbits makes an orbital, where a bunch of 1D string motions or vibrations or excitations makes a 3D particle, which is actually a zero-dimensional particle, because quantum talks about point particles, 0D point particles. So, we've lost track of physics. And, getting back to Max Born, essentially, I think he said it very clearly. So-called physics, meaning mathematical physics, has become more abstract. And it turns out the word abstract is the opposite, the antonym of physics. What is physical is one thing, and what is abstract is something else, is the opposite. And so they should call it abstracist, or something along those lines. What do you study? I study abstractions, not physics. I study abstracist, or I'm an abstracist. I'm not a physicist, I'm an abstracist. That's what they should be saying. Because if it's become more abstract, then it's gotten farther away from physics. Physics is the physical world. These guys are into an abstract world, more so with string theory, which is just pure mathematics and nothing solid. It's just nonsense. And so this is the issue. And so this is what he covers in his book. He covers that in a little video that he made, okay, Jim Al-Khalili. And here's a summary of my take on his notions of what physics is and his argument that he's going to include in his book. And here you get a rundown so you can decide whether you are going to buy that book or not, if it's worth reading for you, okay? I'm just going to give a rundown of it, okay? And let's go with the first one. He goes through a history of how the mathematicians arrived at their conclusions. He asks this question, is it the end of physics here? And he says, no, because see, we thought it was the end of physics at the end of the 19th century, but it turns out that they found out a lot more in the 20th century, and it was not even nearly close to the end of physics. And then from there, they moved on to the 21st century. And at the end of the 20th century, they said, well, is it the end of physics now? And the answer again is no. And why? Because they said, well, look, just this century, we discovered gravity waves a short while ago. We also discovered the Higgs, for which Peter Higgs received a Nobel Prize. And the issue here was that these two phenomena were predicted in the 20th century. In the case of gravity waves, it was predicted by Einstein in 1916. And in the case of the Higgs boson, it was predicted in the 60s by Peter Higgs. And then we confirmed them at the beginning of the 21st century. So obviously they confirmed their foregone conclusions. It would have been interesting that they would not have confirmed them, right? And so he makes a comment. He says the only real unexpected surprise was made in 1998. And I thought he was referring to the rope model, because that's when I discovered the rope hypothesis, 1998. But no, he was referring to the fact that 70% of the universe is dark energy. He said that was discovered in 1998, and that opened up a new can of worms. Now we have this dark energy and dark matter, which we know nothing about, but it gives job security to the new generations. Okay, you know, they can do a lot of math there to keep them busy. And one of them, another thing that has developed or evolved is string theory. He says it's useful mathematics, even though a lot of mathematicians don't believe in it or believe it's part of science. But he says we shouldn't give up on them because it's mathematics that we can still use. It could be useful mathematics. Then he goes on to space. He says space is the distance between things, and he goes through this rigmarole, which I went the other day, in which he removes particles from a vacuum chamber and says, well, have we removed everything? And then he just ends up saying, well, space is the distance between things. Okay, that's it. That's his conclusion. But then he says that the mathematicians don't understand the nature of space. Well, I thought you just defined it as the distance between things. And essentially what he's saying is that's how they use it. So they have no idea what space is to this day. After 2,000 years or more, 3,000 maybe, of talking about space, they still have no idea what space is. He goes on to talk about quantum mechanics. And he says, extremely successful in depicting and explaining phenomena at all scales. Interesting that he uses the word explaining, because he does make a point of saying that mathematical physics only describes. And then he uses this word explain. So obviously he doesn't understand the difference between an explanation and a description. But continuing here, he says, without QM, we wouldn't have computers. Another fib that a lot of people just repeat. You know, we didn't develop computers because of QM any more than we developed atomic weapons because of QM. And you want proof? I'll give you proof. Iran knows QM, quantum mechanics. They know it by heart. They know all the math. They don't have a bomb. So clearly, you know, QM doesn't lead to the bomb. And just like that, QM doesn't lead to computers. Computers were developed by trial and error. Just like Thomas Alva Edison, you know, developed the filament due to trial and error. He used no math and he used no quantum. He just went in and tried different materials until he hit it, you know, with the carbon-based filament. But he says, but QM is only theory in history is the only theory in history that does not have a unique interpretation, meaning they don't have an explanation. In fact, if you look at all the explanations, they're all retarded. They're all magical. Okay? And then he adds, he says, this is a direct quote, we have yet to find the way nature behaves. That means they don't have a theory. There is no such thing as quantum theory. All we have is quantum description, no theory, no explanation whatsoever, because they have no idea how nature behaves. They cannot explain that. And then he says one of the reasons is that all experiments come out the same regardless of which interpretation you take, whether you take the Copenhagen interpretation or the many worlds, they all come out the same. But they don't help us discriminate between which interpretation is correct. Correct means your opinion. What's correct to you for you is incorrect for me. So correct should not be used. And again, he says they all make the same predictions, which again has nothing to do with physics. Okay. So what's the issue? He brings up the issue that Bohr and Einstein had two different outlooks or ways of looking at physics. Einstein apparently wanted physics to be something that explains something about the real world, whereas Bohr says, you cannot explain the real world. You're asking for something impossible. All we can do is describe it. And here it is. Einstein put that in his book, which he revised all the way till the day of his death in 1955. And he says, if we imagine the gravitational field to be removed, there does not remain any flat space-time, but absolutely nothing. In other words, he thought that space was nothing. That's one issue. And then the other issue it was this fight that he had with Bohr, and it's what is physics about? And here it is. He says, here you see the two philosophies there synthesized. Niels said, it is wrong to think that the task of physics is to find out how nature is. Physics only concerns what we can find out about nature. In other words, description. That's what he was referring to. Einstein wanted an explanation. He said the job of physical theories is to approximate as closely as possible to the truth of physical reality. He was asking for a physical interpretation. Bohr was saying all we can do is describe. We can just go in there, do a test, and say what we can say about nature, meaning what we can describe mathematically. That's it. That's where physics stops. Einstein wanted something more. He wanted interpretation. He wanted to understand how the universe works. He died without understanding how the universe works. And partly because of his own fault, because he invented this nonsense, or was the one who got credit for inventing space-time and general relativity, which was a nonsensical explanation for how gravity works out there. He's saying that the reason the Earth doesn't fly out of the solar system is because there's warp time. That's the physical entity that prevents the Earth from flying out of the solar system? Warp time? Are you crazy, Aini? Or did you wake up with a headache today? Okay, so what Khalili does, he goes into this chart, and this synthesizes where physics is today. And I modified it a little bit, and you can see also the blue entries there that I put, those are mine. But essentially he says, look, we have general relativity and quantum field theory, okay? And they're trying to unify those to try to eventually get to what is known as quantum gravity, okay? They're trying to find a theory of gravity that can unite both quantum and general relativity. Now, what is the problem? The problem is that these two theories don't match. And the reason they don't match is, and that they will never match, is that general relativity is based on space-time. Warp space is what causes gravity, according to general relativity. That's nothing at all what quantum says. Quantum says, look, the way it works in the particle world is you throw a particle and you bring the target inwards somehow. So even though you talk about push, pull, whatever, it doesn't matter. The point is these two are two different mechanisms. One says ball on canvas, the thing falls into the depression. The other one says you throw the particle and you bring it in. So they have mathematics for fields, which is general relativity. That's also where quantum field theory is trying to get to. And then you have quantum, which says particles. And so they had to, one of the steps there that they're trying to get in there is that a particle is a vibrating field. Okay, so you see how this is coming together. They're trying to see how they can merge general relativity with quantum mechanics. Okay, this is the issue. Okay, and of course, even if they get the mathematics together, which I doubt, because one is a force and the other one is a geometry, a field theory. So there's no way they can get them to merge or even have anything in common. And that's what string theory is trying to do, by the way. They're trying to quantize space, time. Okay? And so, yeah, good luck with all that. It just provides job security for all these new mathematicians coming out of colleges, out the colleges. Okay, finalizing here, what Al-Khalili does, he puts an idea of how the universe progressed through time. And obviously that first point called the Big Bang, that's got quantum in there. You gotta show how something came out of nothing. And what they had to do was turn two particles that come together, they form nothing. And when they separate, they form something. And I covered that the other day, matter and antimatter, electron, positron, whatever you want to call them, X and Y, doesn't matter, just names. And what they're saying is two particles, a black particle and a white particle come together, they form a no particle. When the no particle separates, it separates into a black and white particle. That's their theory. I mean, that's how simple it is. Okay, but the interesting thing about Khalili is his conclusions. So he tries to synthesize what science is all about. And none of this belongs to science. Science is not just another ideology or belief system. Yes, it is. In other words, mathematical physics, which poses as science, is just another belief system. And it is an ideology that they're trying to spread through these popularizers. It's okay to make mistakes, that's how we learn. No, never, because he claims that physicists admit when they're wrong. That's not true at all. There's not a single physicist, so-called physicist, mathematical physicist out there that ever will admit that he's wrong, especially about quantum mechanics or general relativity. Scientific theory has to be falsifiable. Absolutely not. Falsifiable is a personal opinion. What's false to you is true to me and vice versa. Scientific result has to be reproducible. No, that's experiments. We don't do experiments in science. And you have to choose doubt over certainty. Neither one. Those are opinions. Simplicity and beauty don't always mean truth. And truth, we clean our noses with. Truth is an opinion. So what's his corollary? He say we may need robots, computers, and God and magic. I added all these words, okay? I just changed a little bit his wording, okay? I took a little liberty there. We may need robots, computers, God and magic to find out how the universe works. In other words, in the end, what he's telling you is they've given up hope. They've given up hope of understanding. In fact, you can take Feynman's words. Richard Feynman, he said, we physicists, they call themselves physicists, we've given up on that. On trying to understand, on trying to make sense, on trying to interpret, give a physical interpretation for how, especially the quantum world works, okay? So they've given up on that. And Al-Khalili essentially says the same thing at the end. He says, look, maybe we need a computer or robots or androids or something out there to figure out how all this works, because they'll have more intelligence than we do. For sure, they'll have more intelligence than all the mathematicians on Earth do. Okay, with that, I'll see you, on Sunday, and we'll continue with bashing the celebrities of mathematical physics. We'll see you then. Bye-bye. Ask questions. Insult my mother if you want, no problem. I can take it.